Good morning, and thank you all so much for being here today. My name is Graham Brookie. I am the Vice President for Technology Programs here at the Atlantic Council. This is a special event on driving smart cities in Latin America and the Caribbean. I have to say one quick point of order. The intro music for this event today is markedly better comparably to the rest of Atlantic Council events, and I think that that is probably specific to the subject matter that we're working through today. It's our particular honor to count with us today, sitting here with us on stage first and foremost, Ambassador Brian Nichols, Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Affairs, and Jennifer Bacchus, the inaugural Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Policy, both from the Department of State, who have chosen the Atlantic Council today to launch their program aimed at empowering local governments. The Digital Agenda for Transformation in the Americas, which for those of you who are acronym nerds, it translates to DATA, Data for Cities Initiative. But more on that in a second. Across the region, the strategic and responsible adoption of smart city practices and technologies is already helping to strengthen local governance, make service provision more efficient, and empower the financial capacities of municipalities across the hemisphere. We're going to get into a lot of examples, and so I will spare you in the conversation throughout the rest of the session today. And we are joined today online and here in the Atlantic Council's new studios by representatives from across the region who have driven the adoption of digital adaptation for urban development, including Mayor of Buenos Aires, Jorge Macri, the Secretary of Science and Technology of Guatemala, Gabriela Montenegro, and former Ministry of Technology, Innovation, and Communications of Colombia, Diego Milano Vega. We're also joined by Keith Aishat, Regional Director for Latin America and Caribbean from U.S. Trade and Development Agency, and Andrew Vanjani, Director of the Department of Information and Technology Services at the Organization of American States, as well as our own Safa Shawan Edwards of the Atlantic Council's Cyber Statecraft Initiative, and Diego Area and Valentina Sater of the Atlantic Council's Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center. This event, organized with partners at the Department of State, and the initiative whose announcement we have the honor of hosting, are all about what we're about here at the Atlantic Council. And that is why this year we launched the Atlantic Council's technology programs, which motivated in our sense of responsibility to drive innovation in big, new, and ambitious ways. So across all of the tech programs here at the Atlantic Council, we're now on one team, and that better enables us to work with programs like the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center, who are leading a lot of this work across the region. So, really, really excited to get into the conversation today, and it is my honor to introduce the first segment with Assistant Secretary Brian Nichols and PDAS Jennifer Bacchus, moderated by my fellow Vice President of the Atlantic Council, Jason Marzak, who leads the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center. Without further ado, over to Jason.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Graham. And I'll say that opening music by Erica Ender, one of our advisory council members, I think we own the rights to that for another 2 years through BMG Music. So we're happy to take suggestions for after that period. But I'm thrilled to be joined here on stage by Assistant Secretary Nichols and Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Bacchus for this really, really important day and an announcement of this digital agenda for transformation in the Americas for cities and initiative. This is really exciting. And this goes back to the long-standing partnership that we have here at the Atlantic Council with the State Department on a whole range of different issues. The Assistant Secretary and I were talking about something we were with together in the Bahamas not too long ago. Let me set the context for this conversation, and I'll jump into questions for both of our panelists. But as many in the audience here know, Latin America is the second most urbanized region in the world. It's second only to North America. It's ahead of actually Europe. It's ahead of Asia, Africa, Oceania. And in fact, across the hemisphere, nearly 8 of 10 people live in cities. This was the rationale behind the U.S. Hosting the first ever City Summit of the Americas last year, following its hosting of the leader level 9 Summit of the Americas in 2022. I was privileged, the Atlantic Council was privileged to be there in Denver for that first ever City Summit of the Americas. The momentum, the excitement was just second to none. I know there's a lot of excitement about the continuation of that. And that's because city officials work on the front lines. They work on the front lines of global challenges. They make daily decisions every day that shape this big question of really how do democracies and whether democracies are delivering on promises of services, of security, and opportunity for their communities and citizens. So keeping that in mind and how deeply essential good and effective local governance is for Latin America's domestic resilience and economic opportunities, I want to begin the discussion with you, Assistant Secretary Nichols. Again, welcome. Before we talk about the initiative in depth, I'd like to help to frame this a little bit more. So what challenges, what opportunities do you see in the adoption of digital tools by cities across the region? And then also, what key engagement programs is the U.S. leading to work with local governments across the region?
Well, Jason, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And this is a great opportunity to talk about how do we deliver for the citizens of our region. And you framed it perfectly. I think you actually stole half my talking points about how we got here.
It was a mind meld, right?
It was, and that's perfect. So you think about going back to 2020 and the pandemic and where our region was in terms of lack of access to education online, collapse of commerce, dramatic spike in poverty, lack of access to health care, among other things. Beyond that, we had big challenges with things like delivery of public services, addressing issues of crime and insecurity in our region. So you started talking about the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles 2022. Well, I would go back one event earlier, which was the OAS General Assembly the year before, where we started to really incorporate a digital agenda into our goals for the Western Hemisphere. And then we had 5 pillars there. We built on that in the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles. I would just note that we are building on it further with APEC in San Francisco and then APEC in Lima. And even though Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, people don't immediately think of Latin America, we have a number of countries in our region that are in APEC, and we are talking about how do we deliver for average citizens. And where are our citizens? You noted this is the most urbanized region. So the smart cities piece of this, and the city, some of the Americas in Denver a year ago, a year and a half ago almost, was really an opportunity to both hear from mayors, civil society, private sector, how do we deliver a digital agenda for the people in these regions. And that means delivering on services from the government, security, housing, transportation. And we're going to hear from experts and mayors and leaders in the region talking about how they are delivering in these areas, whether it's smart transportation in Sao Paulo or whether it is access to housing and lighting. All of those things delivered in a smart way that citizens can more easily access and demand accountability is sort of the approach that we have going on this. And I'm super excited, so I don't want to suck up all the time. So I'll pause there.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. I want to go over to Principal Deputy Secretary Bacchus. And when we think about smart cities, we think about modernizing local government. We talk about data, we talk about digitalization, transformation of public services, and thinking about that of course means that large segments of the state are open to potential attacks as well. In what ways is the U.S. working with regional local governments to help with the really critical task that will become even more important, I think, as we're even moving forward on cyber capacity building?
Thanks for the question, and great to be here. And great to be here for an event on smart cities, which is actually, I think, one of the most incredibly important topics that we think about, both because of the cyber issues, but also because of the privacy issues, because who's running your technology will ultimately determine who has access to information about your citizens, how that information is being used, and so it's great to be here. We similarly have had longstanding cooperation, particularly with the OAS on cybersecurity. We have worked through CICTE for many years. I had the opportunity to participate in the last two CICTE cybersecurity summits. One was in Dominican Republic, one was in the Bahamas, and just talk about how is it that we can support this region in making sure that they are, that you reduce the attack surface, that you increase resilience, that ultimately you do not have either state-sponsored or non-state-sponsored actors, ransomware actors coming in and going after these services. It's great to put things online. It's something that we actually think creates transparency, accessibility, but if ultimately you are then creating the opportunity for either ransomware actors or state-sponsored actors to go in and take down those services, then you've just created a tremendous problem. We've seen this around the world in this region, but also, to be honest, almost any country in the world has had this problem. So you need to go in and do the basics up front. You need to make sure that these opportunities, that these systems are secure. You need to do basic cybersecurity. You need to have cyber hygiene. You need to have a national cybersecurity strategy. You need to figure out who's in charge of which part, which, by the way, is complicated in the US and complicated throughout the region. But we've seen tremendous strides over the last 5 years as countries really have adopted cybersecurity frameworks, have really shown up to discuss this variety of issues, and to make sure that this data is secure. But the security comes both from basic cybersecurity, but also who's running those systems. And that part we really do need to continue to pay a lot of attention to. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so excited the US government is investing in smart cities in this region, because ultimately I think it will bring about not just economic prosperity, but national security for this region that's so critically important to the United States.
Thank you so much for queuing both that up. Now, I'd like to go to why we're here today, which is to talk about the Digital Agenda for Transformation in the Americas for Cities initiative with the incredible DATA acronym. What is the initiative? Why is it so important? And what are you hoping to achieve? I'll turn to you, Assistant Secretary Nichols.
Well, this is $4.75 million that's going to go in a few areas. There'll be an incubator and accelerator for projects around cities. There will be capacity building efforts, and there'll be financing opportunities for projects. And this is really going to allow cities, individuals, civil society organizations who have ideas about some element of their urban space to come in, get financing that they need, get their training and capacity building done, all of those things to be able to engage and deliver more rapidly for their citizens. So imagine you want to have better sewage treatment and you have an idea around that. This means you have access to startup financing. This means training and perfecting your project, sharpening it. And this is going to be available throughout our region, and our institutions like USTDA, Development Finance Corporation, USAID can then come in and support these efforts as well, not to mention all the other sources of financing in our hemisphere.
This is incredibly exciting, and we'll hear from USTDA in a follow-up panel. What does the rollout look like?
So we are engaging with partners around the hemisphere. We're starting here with great partners, the Atlantic Council, but we will be able to engage in meetings and bringing in leaders around the hemisphere, talking about this initiative, bringing in the private sector and civil society because they're crucial partners. And then we will have opportunities to do a roadshow going forward and really go to people where they are.
Fantastic. I want to ask you one more question, then go back to Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary. But as we're looking at the Data for Cities initiative, what do you see as the role insofar as encouraging the long-term use of sustainable and secure smart cities technology?
Well, I think that is absolutely vital. When you think about, how do you ensure that cities are properly using the information that they are collecting? And there are some cities that have guarantees in place to ensure this security, verification of data, and that data will not be used in a way that was not authorized. And then you have some who've gone to what we would consider unreliable providers, and that can be a great concern for people. Whether your face is in a database that you don't control and don't have any idea how it will be used can be a source of great concern for the average person.
Principal Decker Bacchus, I'd love to get your thoughts on the importance of the initiative, and also maybe additional thoughts of how it fits into some of the work that's been achieved over the last couple of years, whether the summits, the city summit, and other such efforts.
Well, as I said, I'm so excited that we're able to show up in this way for the region, that we can say, here are some opportunities, here's some resources, here's some capacity building, here's all the tools in the toolkit to essentially make sure that you can have smart cities that work for your citizens on behalf of them to deliver the services they require. In addition to the things you mentioned in terms of what we're building on, I think we're also building on tremendous work over the last few years on how do you govern data? How is data, and by that I don't refer to the great acronym here, but like you can't go to smart cities without the basics on connectivity, data, privacy, transfer of information, and how have you built out all of that, including, as we talked about earlier, cybersecurity. Smart cities should come on top of a really well thought out digital ecosystem plan. If you start with the smart cities and no idea over who's governing it, how it's going, who has access to the information, you end up with a free-for-all over this. And I think, again, to Assistant Secretary Nichols' point, it doesn't give citizens confidence. Like, I personally don't want my information in an insecure database. I don't want people to be able to track where I'm going or what I'm doing. And so as a citizen, I think it's incredibly important that you put these guardrails in place to make sure that the information is being used in a way that accords with the values that I hold dear.
And I would assume also avoiding reinventing the wheel at each city, right? It's an opportunity to kind of look at some of those different best practices, what are the lessons learned, and how are different city leaders dealing with the individual challenge they're seeing, whether it's on cybersecurity or whether it's deployment of better smart city technology.
And I would also note, as Assistant Secretary Nichols said, the multi-stakeholder approach to this is incredibly important. It can't just be government saying, here's what we're going to do. You have to build in from the outset, who are the companies? How are the companies going to use it? What are they thinking is interesting? And what civil society thinking and in academia and technical communities, and all of this needs to be built in from the outset. Our policymaking process in the United States is built around the idea that you roll out these things through a multi-stakeholder approach, and that citizens, and that does include citizens having a voice in the technology. Look, if I can get a smart city that makes it that I don't hit every single red light between my house and where I'm trying to go, that's great. But I would like to make sure that I'm not personally being tracked while doing that.
Yeah. And I think there's so much also expectation about the opportunities smart cities can create, especially insofar as greater transparency of governance, and the importance of then cybersecurity is so vital for ensuring citizens' trust in the technology that's being deployed.
Yes.
Assistant Secretary Nichols, I'll maybe ask you last question. What is for those, whether they're in the room or whether they're watching online and they're excited about this initiative, what is your advice to them insofar as next steps?
Well, watch this space. We have an email address for people who want to reach out and contact us directly. It's dataforcities@state.gov. Great opportunity there to just send your ideas or express your concerns. In your city, I'm sure that there are going to be a lot of people who have ideas about things that could be improved. I would encourage people to build coalitions, to work with their municipal leaders, to work with other civil society organizations, work with the private sector to develop your ideas. And we look forward to working with training, with incubator work, and I expect that we're going to see some really great projects. I mean, we already have smart lighting, e-bikes, recycling projects, housing, education. Those are all things that are going on in our hemisphere already. Maybe your community doesn't have all those things and you'd like to find ways to bring them to you, or you have a new idea that none of us have thought of. This is a great opportunity for you. And our partnership with USTDA, with Development Finance Corporation, USAID, and other financing sources can help scale that depending on what the needs are for your urban area.
Well, as we wrap up here, I mean, this is, I think, as we're all hearing, this is incredibly exciting, right? And this shows really kind of, I think, the continued kind of next frontiers in which the State Department is moving to be able to really address some of the key challenges, but also be a partner in some of these incredible opportunities that we're seeing across the region. And as we talked about from the outset, the importance of cities and the importance of cities for moving forward opportunities to show that democracies really do deliver on some of the priorities that citizens have across the region. So Assistant Secretary Deckles, thank you so much for joining us and for this announcement. Principal Deputy Assistant Bacchus, thank you so much. And thank you for all those who are listening. I'm going to now invite Diego Area, Deputy Director for Strategic Development at the Atlantic Council's Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center, to introduce and moderate our next conversation. Thank you both.
Gracias, Tatevic. Buenos días a todas y a todos. Veo caras conocidas.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. I see some familiar faces. The first thing I'd like to do to kick off this conversation is to extend our thanks, true thanks, not the protocolary diplomatic thanks, but the real thanks to people that come out on a cold and rainy DC morning. Thank you so much. Give yourselves an applause for being here. Thank you to you, Diego, for the exact same thing. And thanks to those who are joining us from other countries virtually, including Minister Montenegro and Mayor Macri. Now, to those who are here in person, just outside the room, there are listening devices if you would like to have simultaneous interpretation into English.
Transmitters are available outside the room. For those online, simply click on the English version in our website. Acabamos de escuchar de dos funcionarios.
So we've just heard from 2 U.S. government officials who are spearheading this initiative. And we've heard details about this exciting initiative to bring more resources and opportunities to Latin America and the Caribbean. In addition to access and modernization, we're also talking about services for the people as beneficiaries, and this in a world that is undergoing a whirlwind of changes over time, and people are seeking information. And there's Instagram and scrolling all over. And I just found a video of a robot prototype that helps you with household chores, and it'll help you take care of your pet and other tasks. We've in a quantum energy flux too, enhanced reality and all sorts of changes. And with all these changes, almost half the population of Latin America and the Caribbean doesn't have access to the internet. So we have a great deal of work to do, and that's why we welcome this initiative, and we hope that it will help, especially given the political changes coming. So we have 3 panelists here that will be sharing their own experiences with us in their experiences with this in Argentina, Guatemala, and Colombia. So Diego was the intendant for Vicente Lopez. He was a provincial deputy in Buenos Aires. He co-founded the political party with his brother and has led initiatives having to do with digital infrastructure, security, and modernization of public services. He's now the mayor of Buenos Aires. Then we have Gabriela Montenegro, PhD in nutrition sciences from Bonn in Germany. She has studies in biomedical engineering from the Free University of Amsterdam. But additionally, and most importantly for our conversation today, she's an important figure in government modernization in her country, focusing her efforts in closing development gaps between urban and rural areas. And we'll be talking about that with her. And then in person here in cold, rainy DC, we have Diego Molano, a Colombian leader who's been recognized for his work in innovation policy. He was a minister of technology and TICs in Colombia, and his experience includes poverty reduction, improving connectivity, and modernizing public services. Thank you to all of you for being here.
Macri, we know that Buenos Aires is a city leader in digital governance and modernizing their services. I would like to know what made it possible and especially what made these successful policies to continue to survive throughout political
Hola Diego,
changes.
buenas tardes a todos. Muchísimas gracias. Gracias al
Hi, Diego.
Atlantic
Thank
Council
you.
y
Thank
al
you to the
Departamento de
Atlantic
Estado por
Council and to
invitarme
the
a participar
Department
en
of
este
State for
encuentro,
inviting me
a
to
los
participate
compañeros de
in
panel,
this event.
a Diego, a
And
la doctora
greetings to
Montenegro también.
my two
Yo
fellow
creo que lo más
panelists, Diego
relevante
and Dr.
y lo que me ha
Montenegro.
permitido esto
I
son
think
dos realidades.
the
Uno es
most
una
relevant
estabilidad de
thing
gobierno,
here
planes
was
sostenidos a largo
government
plazo, una visión
stability,
compartida desde
sustainable
los
plans
alcaldes
throughout
anteriores
time, a shared
y
vision
mía,
with former
que se ha transformado
mayors
en política pública,
that has
pero
become
además también
public
una
policy,
comunidad,
but
un
in
privado
addition, a
organizado
partnership
o
with the
no,
private
simplemente como
sector
ciudadano, empresas
or with
que se mueven
citizens.
en este
So
ecosistema.
companies
Yo
that are
digo
part
siempre,
of
la
this
ciudad de Buenos Aires no tiene
ecosystem.
litio, no
I
tiene
always
energías
say that
renovables, lo que tiene es
the
capital
city of
humano.
Buenos Aires
Y
doesn't have
tanto es
renewables or
así que
lithium.
14
It has
unicornios que han salido de
human
la región
capital,
11
and we've had
salieron de la ciudad de Buenos
14
Aires. O sea, hay
unicorns that
talento
came out of the region,
innovador
11 out of
vinculado
the
al
city of Buenos Aires.
ecosistema
So there's a lot of
digital,
innovative talent
tecnológico que
linked
es
to the
muy
digital
relevante.
and
Y
technological
déjame
ecosystems.
decirte algo de
And
concepto, me parece. Vos
I
decías
would like
recién
here to
que
say
cuando
something
estabas
else.
esperando para ingresar en
When
esta
you
charla,
were, when I was
ya había
waiting to be accepted in
novedades
the
que te
Zoom room,
cambiaban la realidad. Y ahí me gustaría poner un poco
or rather,
un marco general
I would like
conceptual
to
que tiene que ser
provide you
un
with
hilo
the
conductor
general
de todos los que tenemos
framework
responsabilidad. Es un momento
that should be taken
de
into
una
account
altísima
by all those
incertidumbre,
that
diría yo. Y yo acá
have
voy a
some
hacer un
responsibility
paralelo
with
entre
them.
cambio
This
climático
is a
y
time of real
evolución y
uncertainty. We
revolución
have
tecnológica. Lo que la
climate
IA
change,
generativa
evolution,
está
and
generando
revolution, like
y va a
technological
generar
evolution and revolution, because
digamos, en la
AI
evolución
will
del
actually
mercado tiene
really
ese grado de
disrupt
profundidad. Es un
markets
momento de
and
mucha
will
incertidumbre
affect them
cuando
very
creímos que
deeply. It's a
teníamos
moment
todas
of a
las
great deal of
respuestas, nos
uncertainty.
cambiaron
We
todas
thought
las
we had all
preguntas
answers, and all of a sudden the
y eso
questions
requiere
changed.
primero una actitud de
And
profunda
for that,
humildad.
we
La semana
need
pasada
to be
tuvimos acá
humble.
un encuentro
Last
de
week, we had a
especialistas de
meeting
IA
here with
de la UCSI, la Unión de
experts on
Ciudades
AI
Capitales
from
Iberoamericanas,
the UCSI,
donde participaron desde
the Capital
estudiantes hasta
City Union of
universidades,
Ibero
gobiernos
American
y empresas
cities,
privadas. Y
where
yo
we had
planteaba esto, ¿no?
government,
Frente a
private
tanta
companies,
incertidumbre,
and
lo peor que nos
students
puede pasar es que
participate.
alguien
And
crea
I
que tiene
talked about
todas
this.
las respuestas.
When you're
Pero que
dealing with a
tanto
lot
el
of
cambio
uncertainty,
climático como la
the worst
irrupción de
thing
esta
is to have someone that
revolución
thinks that has
tecnológica
all the
y una
answers. And
revolución
when
no
we're
es un
dealing with climate
proceso
change, we have
evolutivo, en un proceso
evolution
evolutivo
and
uno
also
puede
a
subirse al
revolution.
tren. Una revolución
If
deja
it's an
ganadores y
evolution,
perdedores
you
y me
can
parece que
get
quienes
on
tenemos
the train
responsabilidad de
and
enfrentar
run with
esas
it. But when
realidades
it's a
tenemos que hacerlo con
revolution, you
mucha
have
humildad, con
winners
las
and
certezas o
losers. So we have to
información que
be
tenemos,
humble. We have to
compartiendo datos
understand
rápidamente
what
para,
information is
porque
certain,
lo que
and we
antes
have
era
to
un periodo de
exchange
5 o 10
information
años,
very
hoy es un
fast,
fenómeno
because
de 6
what
meses
happened in
o
the
un año.
past
Así que
in
hay que estar
5 or 10 years,
constantemente en
now it
movimiento y
happens
no
within
pensar
6 months. So
que
you
la
have to be
decisión que tenemos hoy se
constantly
escribe en
moving,
piedra y va a
and you
permanecer
don't
el
have
año
to
que
think
viene,
that
sino
whatever
estar
decision you
dispuestos
make today
con
is
written on stone, and you're not willing to change it in the future. We need critical thinking, and we need to review our decisions constantly, especially at such an uncertain and aggressive moment in terms of changes. Mayor Macri, before we move on to Guatemala, I wanted to ask you something else. I was reviewing the artificial intelligence bot used in the city of Buenos Aires body. How does it help you? How does it help you reduce digital gaps? Well, it's WhatsApp based. It uses artificial intelligence, and we developed it during the pandemic. It gave us a very quick bridge to establish linkages in terms of legislation and how to address the COVID pandemic. It could be about making a request for assistance for a medication or for even have access to vaccination. It has evolved now. We have generative intelligence. So on the WhatsApp chat, you can say, well, I'm in Buenos Aires. I'm going to spend 2 days here. I have 2 children. Please let me know what cultural and free programs there are in Buenos Aires. And that chat answers you with different proposals. But really, that bot is the tip of the iceberg of a government that is technology based with a lot of information exchange and that uses the same type of artificial intelligence tools for traffic, climate, security, safety. It has allowed us to reduce our response time to an emergency by many minutes, and every minute saves lives. It has allowed us to reduce in more than 1,000 cases with predictive systems linked to crime, to arrive earlier with a patrol because we have mapped the city. It allows us to have a digital ring with more than 4 million license plates that come into the city and leave the city on a daily basis. So we have information about the vehicles. We have if and sometimes we have a criminal in a stolen car, and we detected one a day at least, and that has helped us reduce the criminality rate in this sense by a lot. So Boti is a user-friendly bot, artificial intelligence based, and we've added also generative artificial intelligence for questions that request a very creative answer by the government. It's amazing, and some of the success indicators that you have are quite positive. The objective of this conversation is for decision makers from other countries to hear from successful experiences in other cities to try to replicate them. But let me go back to my initial question. In a region where at least half the population doesn't have access to the internet, we have cities that are doing incredible things, such as Buenos Aires. And this is the perfect segue to Minister Montenegro, who has an incredible story about how she reduced gaps, how she included the most vulnerable ones. Minister Montenegro, thank you for being here with us today. I would like you to talk a little bit more about how you did all
Buenos
this with
días,
your
para mí
projects.
de verdad
Good
es un honor
morning.
estar con
From
ustedes.
me,
Les
it's an
agradezco mucho por la
honor to be
invitación,
here. Thank you very
compañeros de
much for the
panel.
invitation,
Bueno,
and
como
greetings to my
yo estoy
fellow
recapitulando un
panelists.
poco las
I
anteriores y solo para agregar
would
que
like to add
nosotros
something to what
quisiéramos
has
ya
been
tener como
said
las
so
experiencias
far. We would
exitosas ya
like to have
presentadas. Tenemos un esfuerzo.
successful
Estamos en un
experiences
esfuerzo
already
para empezar.
collected,
Contarles
but
que
we are just
Guatemala
starting. So I wanted
es un
to
país
let you know
de
that
mucha
Guatemala
inequidad.
is a
No solo a
country with
nivel
a great
urbano,
deal
que
of
hablaba
inequality, not only in urban
la
areas.
preguntada de las diferencias que hay, por ejemplo, en
I was
ruralidad.
being asked
Tomar en
about
cuenta que la ruralidad
differences in terms
también
of rural
es
areas and
el
urban
idioma.
areas.
O sea,
Well,
tenemos desigualdades
we can start with
económicas, pero
language.
también
Language is
usted mismo
the language
menciona
spoken in rural areas is different. We also have economic inequality. We have challenges that have to do with connectivity or electrification. A lot of inequality in that sense throughout the country. We are moving forward for sure. I undertook my
en el mes de marzo.
position in the
Entonces, parte de nuestro
month of
compromiso ha
March. So
sido
part of our
justamente
commitment was
buscar
precisely
que la
to
tecnología
try to
llegue
make sure
a
that
los que,
technology
digamos, que las
reaches
brechas no
those that most
aumenten,
need it
tal vez que
and
no
make sure
disminuyan,
that
pero que no sean más
gaps
grandes, ¿verdad?
don't increase.
Entonces,
They may
eso
not
es
be
nuestro
reduced, but
compromiso.
at least
Estamos,
we
por
wanted
ejemplo,
to stop
trabajando
them
con
from
algunos centros
growing. That's
comunitarios,
our commitment.
con
We're working with community
tecnología,
centers,
con
with
paneles solares y que
solar panel
se agrupan
technology too,
mujeres. Esta ha sido una
and with
experiencia, yo
women's groups.
personalmente, de
This has
gestión, lo que
been
viene
an
anterior, pero estamos
experience
apoyándolo,
that came from the
lo
previous
vemos como una
administration, and
oportunidad
we're
precisamente
supporting
para
it.
llegar a
We're
las
seeing it as an
mujeres y
opportunity
rurales
to reach
con
rural
idioma,
women
también temas de
also
pertenencia
in
cultural,
their
porque también
own
vale los
language,
idiomas y empezar con trámites tan simples
so
como
that we
son
can help them start
conseguir
with
algunos procesos que
the
son
process, for example,
gubernativos, por
to
ejemplo, DNIs, etcétera, que pueden
get
hacerse en
an
línea,
ID
que
or
estamos
things like
hablando que
that
no
that can be
solo es
done
después la
online.
conectividad, sino
So
que
it's not
esa
only about connectivity
alfabetización
itself,
que hay
it's
que
about
hacer a
literacy.
las personas.
It's
Nosotros
about
vemos
educating
una
people.
oportunidad muy grande con
We
el
saw a
uso de toda
great
la tecnología.
opportunity
Es fascinante
in
y vemos
terms
como
of
una
how
herramienta para que
technology
puedan
can be
disminuir esas brechas,
used.
pero por
And
el
we
otro
think this is a
lado también
tool
tenemos
to
mucho
be able to
temor
bridge some gaps.
que
But we're
las
also
inequidades crezcan
afraid
y que
that
después sea
inequality may
este monstruo que
increase,
no se puede
and
controlar y que deje
then
de persona de
for
ser
this
el
to
centro de
become
la
a
sociedad. Y
monster that
hablaba de
cannot
los
be
robots.
controlled,
Yo
and
quisiera
then
un par
people
de
will
robots
stop
por
being
acá,
the
pero
center of
también
society, but the
ese
robots will
mismo miedo,
replace
temor
this
de qué puede ser cuando no estamos la sociedad
center,
preparada.
citizens basically being the center of society.
Tenemos gente que no lee, por
Our
ejemplo, entonces,
we
¿cómo
have
hacemos
people
para
that
que
cannot
realmente
read,
cuidar esa
and
parte
so on and so
ética?
forth. So we
Creo que
need to
nosotros
make
estamos
sure that we take care
trabajando
of the
de la
ethical
mano,
part of the
la
equation,
parte
and we
ética y
need
la
to
parte de
work
conectividad real. La
both
conectividad va a ser lo
things at the
más
same
fácil.
time,
Lo
the
más
ethical
difícil va
part
a
of
ser
it and the
crear esa
connectivity.
cultura
The easiest part is going to be
realmente
improve
de
connectivity. The
transformación
hardest
digital.
part
Solo
is
con
going
darle que
to
también
be
usted
to
mencionaba al
develop
principio,
that
me parece, fuera
culture
de lo
of
anterior,
transformation.
que ojalá que esto se
Something
convirtiera en
else
política
that I
pública,
wanted
porque
to
aquí
add
se ha
is
iniciado,
that
vamos
I would
muy
like for this
atrasados.
to become a public
Digamos, ha
policy.
habido
We just started,
una
but we are
intención de
really
pasar al
lagging
gobierno abierto
behind.
electrónico,
There was
pero han sido pasos muy chiquitos.
a lot
Este
of
gobierno
determination to
precisamente sí
start
tiene el
with an
compromiso
open
de esa
government
transformación
initiatives, but the
digital.
steps
Se
have been
trabaja
very
con las
small.
mesas,
The
aunque no
government is
están
committed.
tan
We're
rápido
working
como
with
quisiéramos,
different
por lo menos se está
working groups.
integrando a los
Progress is
diferentes
being
sectores
slow,
y
but
uno
at
muy
least steady.
importante
We're
que es la
trying
sociedad
to
civil.
integrate the different stakeholders, one of them,
Yo creo
a
que
very important
para
one, being
usted y en
civil
su trabajo,
society.
esta iniciativa
Thank you
que se
for you
anunció el día de
for your
hoy
work, for
trae
your
oportunidades importantes
this
para
initiative
poder
that was launched
traer más
today.
recursos y
I guess poses
capacidad
very
para, sobre
important
todo para las zonas rurales. Definitivamente no
opportunities,
vamos a
especially for
solucionar el
rural
problema de las
areas.
brechas o de la
Obviously, we're not
pobreza, las
going to solve the
desigualdades
issue of
en la región,
poverty or
pero vamos a
inequality
aunar
in the
hacia su
region,
solución.
but hopefully
Vuelvo a
we
Washington,
will add
D.C.
to the
Ministro,
solution. Let
gracias
me
de nuevo
go
por
back to
venir.
Washington,
Usted
D.C.
tiene vasta
Minister, thank you for
experiencia
being
en
here.
transformación
You
digital de
have a
servicios
great deal of
públicos.
experience in terms
Estuve
of public
viendo
service
muchos ejemplos
digitalization
exitosos
and a
que
lot of
sucedieron en Medellín.
successful
Me gustaría que
examples,
nos contara sobre su
bearing in mind what has
experiencia, lecciones
happened in Medellin.
aprendidas, cosas que
Could you talk a little
podríamos
bit about your experience, lessons
replicar en otros
learned,
países, otras
things that could be
ciudades, incorporar a la
replicated in
sociedad civil
other
en la
countries,
región? ¿Qué ha
other
aprendido de todo este
cities?
proceso?
What has civil society or the private sector learned about all this, for example? Thank you very much for your invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. It wasn't hard to be here because my office is a block away. But the difficult part of it is that I'm leaving, I'm flying to Bogota in an hour and a half. Well, we need to bear in mind different things in terms of gaps. I I am a member of a board of a group that has been working on the most important report on technology in the world, and we published it a few days ago. We found out that the gap basically, if you analyze the country ranking, we're more or less all of us in the same at the same level, but in absolute terms, that gap is growing. That's like when you're riding a bicycle, you have the peloton in the front, you're in the back, you're pedaling really, really hard, but the ones in the front are pedaling even hard, and you think you're doing very well because you're pedaling, pedaling, pedaling. But the truth is that the gap is growing. In Latin America, 78% of Latin Americans are connected to the internet. And then you wonder, are they well connected to the internet? What do I mean? Like you are here in Washington, D.C., fiber optic at home with a terminal at home. In Latin America, in households with children, less than 15% with children are well connected to the internet because most of them are connected through 4G or 5G networks and through prepayment services that are used up really fast. And when you use up your data, then you connect through different systems via WhatsApp, Meta, and so on and so forth. But that's not really the internet. Therefore, that gap continues to grow. But we also found out that the problem is not in terms of infrastructure. Of course, we need to keep building infrastructure, but the problem is how people are using technology. The gap is more on the user side, on the demand side, and we focused for too long on the supply side, on infrastructure. No, we need to make sure that people use it and are productive. So, how do you solve this issue? Well, I think Dr. Gabriela and Mayor Macri have already said it and have hit the nail on the head. The main issue that we have in Latin America is talent. In the ranking that we have in the report that we're going to publish on in terms of digital talent, we're really at the bottom. We're really at the bottom. We need to improve our higher education for people to be ready to join the labor market. And we have less and less people going, or fewer and fewer people going to our universities, so we're not producing talent. And that's what Mayor Macri said. In their city, they have a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of talent in that regard. This is not about copying and pasting. This is about coming together. In terms of digital economy, the main element for success is scale economies. Everyone uses the same word, the same WhatsApp that people use it in Indonesia, the same Google that people use in Latin America. However, every city is coming up with their own app, their own technology, their own solution. What we have to do is to come together, and maybe the Atlantic Council could be a very important stakeholder to bring everyone together and standardize everything and have scale economies. That is the most important thing, scale economies.
In the second city summit, I think that would be a great opportunity to drive an initiative like you're describing, because that's going to bring everybody together, civil society, private sector, etc. Exactly. Because as Jennifer was saying, the ecosystem needs to have a foundation that is common to everyone. We need to get on the same page, build that ecosystem so that we're all working with the same thing, and then develop your applications, etc., so that you can have economies of scale. And it's urgent, as Mayor Macri said, and we've actually been following the example of Buenos Aires closely. It's really a reference. And the more we standardize, the better it's going to go for all of us. Yes. So let's go to the second round of questions. We'll have a bit of a more dynamic exchange. We don't have a lot of time, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity to ask the mayor, who has committed to the Atlantic Council to leading this, and especially because you've been working on this for a while. What are the suggestions that you would give to cities that are just beginning to adopt technologies? What lessons learned could you share? Well, as Diego said, this isn't about copying and pasting, but I can use another metaphor. When you have the different pelotons in cycling, right? Colombia's better in cycling even than Argentina is. But you don't want one group slowing down the other group. You let the faster peloton go ahead, move ahead, and break records. But you also don't want to leave anybody behind. So the leaders show the way, but nobody falls behind. And I'll be happy to try to take the lead on this. I think we can reach out to companies and take advantage of different meetings, etc., and have partnerships because you can identify the creative initiatives. And we in the government, we tend to be slow, so we aren't always the best source. But one good way to close gaps is to think about digitization, but not just that. We need to focus on English as a language too. There's a gap there too, because everything that happens in the technology world happens in English. So we have bilingual education. We had 180,000 students graduating in that this year. And with digitization and English, this goes hand in hand. In fact, the digital platforms can help people learn English. And so this will help everybody have greater access in the technology world. And then there's an initiative that we're beginning. We're going to be the lead city in this. We're going to open up 3 centers called TUMO, Tumo, if you're not familiar with it. It's a non-formal education mechanism. It originated in Armenia, led by Sam Simonian, an Iranian raised there. He's a successful entrepreneur in the US, and it's a marvelous system that really generates creativity and the arts in this digital ecosystem. So design, robotics, all of this becomes accessible to kids 13 and up. It's a place where they can build new knowledge. It's wonderful. In that age, as the secretary was saying, from 13 to 18, kids are bored in classrooms. We need to help them ask questions and not just answer ours. And here is where we can use technological opportunities. It's a wonderful tool. So English, working with the private sector, and then TUMO as a great way to challenge the more traditional educational models. And what else can the multilateral world do in neighbor countries like the US and the private sector, civil society? What could be done in your mission to help close the gaps in your country, Secretary? Oh, I am totally in agreement with the idea of regional standardization. All this technology is based on data. We need to gather the data and have that be the platform for the next step.
Ahora aquí tengo el tema de un poco con el ministro con el alcalde, perdón, de Buenos Aires, el
Now,
tema, por ejemplo, que usted dijo en
vis-a-vis
inglés, son
what
las diferencias
the
culturales,
mayor said, I have to take issue with a little bit. You're focusing on English, but we are looking at it differently. We believe that the native languages should be respected and fostered as well.
creo que una parte
I mean,
importante
one can have both, of
sería,
course.
creo
One
que
important thing,
esa parte de las hackatones creo que son muy importantes para ver dónde están específicamente las como
it's
nuestras
important
fortalezas, pero también
to
esas debilidades para dar
analyze
ese
our
salto.
strengths and
Yo creo
weaknesses
que el
and
apoyo que
build
nosotros
on
necesitaríamos
that.
principalmente es
Mainly,
como no es copy and paste, comprendo, pero por lo menos empezar a
it's true
ver
we can't copy and paste,
dónde
but I think at a minimum we need
dónde
to
estamos, pero no
see where we are with regard
dónde
to
estamos, pero cómo hacemos para dar el
others
salto
and how we
sin
can
tanto paso,
take that
¿verdad? Es como
next step without having to go through everything that everyone
diálogos,
else
por ejemplo,
went
con
through. I've
otros
been in
países
dialogues with
hermanos
other
y sí veo
countries
nuestro
of the
pasar,
region,
¿verdad? Como digo, nosotros
and I
tenemos
see
acá
that there
todavía
could be
muchos
some
retos,
leapfrogging. There are many
la planificación, por
challenges
ejemplo, para
in
hablar de
terms of
ciudades,
planning. I
la
mean, to actually
planificación
have a
desde la
smart,
base no está
sustainable city,
muy bien hecha,
it
¿verdad? Entonces,
requires
a
solid
mí lo que más me
planning
gustaría es
in
como
advance. So what
continuar
I would
estos
like
diálogos,
the
buscar
most
que, por
is to
ejemplo,
have
países
more
hermanos,
dialogues
amigos
like
que nos están
these
apoyando
and
en algunos
work
temas, pero
with
siento que nos hace
like-minded
falta todavía como esa
countries,
estrategia.
countries working on the same thing, and
Porque
to
ya se
work
está
at
hablando
the
de
level of
legislación, pero todavía nos
strategy.
hace falta como
There are
algunas
talks
cosas
of
básicas.
laws, but I think you need to go to something even more basic first. So I'd like to see a continuation of these dialogues. We need to analyze properly where exactly we are and what's possible to do in one administration. But above all, I'm clear that we cannot allow the gaps to continue to grow. Thank you, Secretary Montenegro. It's important to bring decision makers and leaders together from different areas, as we do have such diversity in our region. Now, Diego, polarization is an issue around the world, and the region is not immune to that. What public policies regarding technology and public goods, etc., which are going to be able to survive these political headwinds? Well, I think that the private sector can help with this. When we work with a country, a startup, when you look at a startup, how much does the idea cost? Zero, nothing. The value of a startup is not in the idea, it's in the execution and making it happen. And the same thing is true in public policy. The plan is worth nothing. It's as Mayor Macri says, the value lies in doing it. And that's what people have to see. My plan is to create a new economy, for example, around the digital economy, new jobs, new exports, new development, right? Or my plan can be modernize cities, iron out the kinks in the bureaucracy, or improve public safety. It's a major issue in Latin America, but the key is execution, implementation. Put your money where your mouth is, as the Americans say. So I want to stop being an advisor and to be an implementer. I'm going to be moving to Bogota to operationalize some of these things. There's an initiative whose main shareholder is the District of Bogota, so to speak. And we are going to implement a new era of smart cities in Bogota. So you need to, in light of polarization, focus on what's truly worth something. Well, thank you, and good luck with your new responsibility. Thank you for being here, Mayor, Secretary. Thank you for joining us as well. We know you're incredibly busy. And we're going to move on now to yet another panel with my colleague Valentina Sader, and we'll also be hearing from the private sector. We're going to hear from Amazon Web Services too with a video. Thank you to everybody.
Hello everyone, I'm Andrés Tachta, Managing Director of the Latin America Public Sector team at Amazon Web Services. I'm recording today from sunny Las Vegas, and I wanted to extend a special thank you to the Atlantic Council's Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center and the US Department of State for the invitation to share a few thoughts with you today. I'm honored to be talking to this distinguished audience, and it is great to see my fellow Argentine, Jorge Macri, Mayor of the City of Buenos Aires, also present today. Empowering communities with the latest smart city technology offerings is critically important, as big urban centers are attracting more and more people. By 2050, it is expected that 70% of the total world population will live in large urban areas. Through strategic analysis of urban data, design of resilient urban infrastructure, and a focus on improving citizen services, cities can increase citizen satisfaction and optimize the use of resources, all while meeting climate sustainability goals. And the private sector provides government customers with cutting-edge cloud infrastructure and IT services to achieve these objectives. Panama's National Civil Protection System, for example, created an early warning flood system in the Juan Diaz River watershed that uses artificial intelligence modeling to save lives. Another example comes from the state of Querétaro in Mexico, where state officials are using their own data in near real time to generate insights and make decisions quickly. The impact ranges from preventing student dropouts to providing economic support to the most vulnerable populations. These two examples, and many more we could share, are just the start of what we believe will become a great area of innovation that will drive better, more efficient citizen services and increase the quality of life throughout Latin America. Enjoy the event. We look forward to hearing from all of you so that together we can think of even more ways for us to use innovative technology to help fix the many challenges facing our citizens in the hemisphere. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that was the perfect way for us to turn to our conversation, because we've talked about the importance of these technological advancements in the scope of security, prosperity, inequality, the role of this Data for Cities initiative for financing smart cities in the region, but also the inequalities in the regions, and also the importance of digital literacy, which I think is something that we will touch on, especially because now this conversation is supposed to emphasize the responsibility that we have in adopting some of these tools and digital tools and technologies. And for that, I'm delighted to be here, joined by an esteemed group of experts who can discuss the responsibility of adopting these digital tools in the Americas. I'm going to start by my right here with Keith Arsht. He's the Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean at the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, and responsible for developing and supervising USTDA's activities in the region to support priority infrastructure projects and that create opportunities for U.S. exports. To the right of Keith is also my fellow Brazilian, Andrew Vanjani. He's the Director of the Department of Information and Technology Services at the Organization of American States, the OAS, and he has a long career in this field, including within Maryland's Department of Information and Technology, which I know will come in handy here for this conversation. And last but not least, my colleague within the Atlantic Council, Safa Shawan Edwards. She's the Director of the Capacity Building Initiative within the Atlantic Council Technology Programs, where she coordinates the overarching strategy for tech program capacity building efforts designed to upskill policymakers, break down silos to build communities of action, and develop the next generation of the global technology workforce. Basically everything that we already touched on. So to kick us off, I wanted to turn to you, Keith. Assistant Secretary Nichols just announced the launch of the Digital Agenda for Transformation in the Americas Data for Cities initiative. To help us kick off this discussion, how will the U.S. Trade and Development Agency support it?
Great. Thank you very much. And I want to, first of all, thank you, Valentina, for moderating this great panel. To my panelists, it's a pleasure to join you. To the Atlantic Council, thank you very much for hosting us today, and especially to our partners at the Department of State for all their support and leadership in this space. We are very proud to help implement the Data for Cities initiatives that was launched today. And USTDA has long partnered with local governments in the region, and this initiative will deepen and expand our partnerships to advance smart city infrastructure and projects in the regions. So specifically, our role within this initiative, as I mentioned, and is actually in part of your handouts as well. We've very grateful to receive the funding from the State Department through an interagency agreement for nearly $3 million for project preparation, particularly focused in this space. So what USTDA is the project preparation agency of the US government. We can provide even more grants in this space for feasibility studies, technical assistance, and pilot projects that can help advance smart cities projects in the region while opening up the door for U.S. technologies and solutions to provide some great advancements in this area. So, we can get into some more examples, but as one of the main implementers of this initiative, we're very proud to be a part of this and look for new projects in the smart city space. Thank you.
I'm sure that many of our partners in local government around the region are very excited to hear more about how this program can actually benefit them directly and how is it that they can actually get in touch to learn more. And Assistant Secretary Brian Nichols shared the link and the email to get in touch with for more information. So I think that will also be important. But Andrew, turning to you, across the region, from the smallest rural towns to the largest urban centers, we see the implementation of technologies applied to service delivery and policy implementation across the board and in many areas in particular. These go from online paying system for local taxes to whole-scale security monitoring systems, but there are many interesting projects that we see all across Latin America and the Caribbean. How quickly have these new technologies and tools actually been incorporated into the region, and what do we mean by the responsible adoption of these tools?
Yeah, so let me thank you as well, Valentina, and my panelists and the Atlantic Council for the invitation. I think this is a great event with all the right folks in the room and virtually, and to have a very productive discussion. Yeah, I mean, over the past decade, I would say, if not longer, it's been a lot of digital adoption in the region, Latin America and Caribbean mainly. And I think one thing is to have the digital adoption, but I've seen also a little bit of fragmentation on some of these initiatives. And I was talking earlier with Keith, and I'm reading here the brochure on the data for cities, and there are a lot of pilots, investments that happen. They start with proof of concepts and then pilots, and then I'm curious to know if we're measuring the metrics on how many of those continue, right? And I don't know whether that's happening. And I do see a lot of investment on smart cities and e-government, but I'm not sure whether they're scaling to the rural areas, and we talked a little bit about this earlier. It's creating, as the Minister of Guatemala said, kind of a digital divide. We have more digital adoption, but digital divide is expanding in a way. And so, again, it could be for a variety of reasons, maybe lack of connectivity that exists in rural, which I've learned in Maryland. You would think that we are very well connected, but I traveled to deep pockets of Maryland that, with Senator Van Hollen and Ben Cardin and David Trone, and we are not as connected as we thought we were. And so a couple of things that I would keep in mind is that fragmentation. A couple of other things that I would think is from the OAS perspective, and our 4 pillars are to promote democratic principles and protect human rights and sustainable development and security across the region. I also don't see a lot of alignment on, at the national level, perhaps, from those core principles. And I think foundation base should be on those core principles. And on the other side, from the national perspective, and we talked a little bit about data and, protection, data protection and citizens wanting to own their own data and so on. What is the appetite of each nation in terms of the sovereignty, right? Whether it's national sovereignty, whether it's digital sovereignty, citizen sovereignty. I think that's important. And what I mean by that is, what is how much autonomy and control we want to have over these digital assets that we're implementing, the infrastructure as well, the data. And so I think those are things that we have to keep in mind as well.
Safa, I wanted to turn to you, especially after Andrew's point that he just made, but also as a follow-up to the conversation that we just heard about the importance of digital literacy. And I think that this is something that goes directly to your expertise here at the Atlantic Council, but what role can education and capacity building play in supporting the development of responsible governance, transparency, and security standards in the adoption of these digital tools? And I think that this is particularly important for Latin America and the Caribbean, and I would love to hear from you on what the role is and how we can make that happen.
Thanks so
much, Valentina. Yeah, absolutely. And just really happy to call out that capacity building is a significant thread here. As we invest in these new technologies, as we adopt these new technologies, there's also requisite investments that have to be made on training and education. So what does that look like in order to maintain and use and take advantage of these new tools? Obviously, technical trainings immediately come to mind to protect this technology. But in addition to that, there's also a need for policy and strategy training to better understand how do we govern these technologies, how do we leverage them, but also keeping that thread, that through line of there's responsibility here. What responsibility do we have for folks, and how do we make sure that we keep that front of mind as we're developing policies, as we're developing strategies, and there's that opportunity to engage policymakers and folks in different organizations through that. The last piece is, I think for average people, in a way, what we're talking about is how do we create more informed users of technology? Because everyone is a user of technology, but they have varying different levels of understanding of that. So how do we create a more informed populace that is able to take full advantage of these technologies, but also understands the ramifications of that and the responsibilities associated with that, so they can hold their governments more accountable?
Yeah, for sure. I don't know how many of us here actually read through do you accept everything that you are sharing with websites that you're clicking on. So I think that this is part of the digital literacy experience of understanding the degree of information that you're actually sharing and if you're actually comfortable with that or not. But nowadays, if you reject it, then you don't have access to everything that you wanted to see. So I think that this is very important for us to continue these conversations. Keith, I wanted to just thinking about, Safa mentioned a bit of the investment part. In what ways has the USTDA been working on the adoption of responsible digital tools for urban development that could serve as a success story for the region? And if there are any lessons that you can share with us in terms of those adoptions and the responsibility and accessibility of those?
Well, yes, thank you very much. And I just wanted to touch on a couple of the questions that Andrew raised. I thought that was very important. I'm going to try to integrate that into my answer. But we at USTDA do follow the monitor and the implementation of our projects, and we are proud of our success. One of the success stories we have in this space is in Jamaica with smart streetlights, and it's something that Assistant Secretary Nichols brought up in terms of the lighting and how important that is. And so in Jamaica, we partnered with JPS, which is the utility there, to test and pilot smart streetlights and really incorporating LED technologies and along with intelligent controls and metering capabilities. They were able to not only implement smart streetlights in Kingston, in Montego Bay, but also in the rural areas. So it actually was it led to over 100,000 new smart streetlights across Jamaica. And going back too, we're very pleased and proud to be partnering with Minister Montenegro on the digital connectivity centers she mentioned in her presentation on the last panel. These digital connectivity centers there's about 10 pilots right now for the rural areas that are women-led and indigenous-led and utilizing solar energy. And that, we hope, will lead Guatemala to implement over 3,000 sites across rural Guatemala. So these are, there is a divide between, the cities. There's such urbanization, but also bringing those benefits to rural areas is important. Obviously, the topic of today is smart cities. We have many ongoing projects in the region. We have returned to Kingston and have an ongoing pilot for smart city technologies there. We also are working with the city of Mérida in Mexico in terms of the public transit and improving the bus system there. We're doing that also in Quito, Ecuador, where over 70% of the population utilizes public transit every day to get where they need to go. And so we also are helping them with intelligent transportation systems there. I visited the bus control center, and you can see how the traffic's progressing through Quito. So it's very exciting to partner with great local and state and city governments, which we do, and the private sector as well. Again, this multi-stakeholder approach is critical. We're very proud of the partnerships we have, and we're very proud to have the opportunity to reach even more, to partner with more cities throughout the region.
And that's for sure. The multi-stakeholder approach is definitely one that it's great that we were able to hear from AWS as well in terms of the public-private partnerships that we can advance in terms of the adoption of these digital tools. Andrew, you've spoken publicly before about the need for solid brakes when undergoing such high-speed transformations, particularly with the implementation of AI for policy. I wanted to pause here and ask, what do you mean by that? And what lessons can we draw from to learn about both the need of said brakes and the best ways to design them? And I think that also goes into the responsibility aspect of what we are talking about and the implementation and tracking of how the metrics and scaling of these tech advancements.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just to clarify, that's not my quote. I stole that quote from a panel where I was back in the blockchain days in 2016, 17 in Brazil. There was this panelist that talked about, Formula One is very big in Brazil. There was this very famous Ayrton Senna who died. And apparently he said something to the extent of, we need to put better brakes in these race cars, but not to slow down, but to be able to go faster. And, we want to accelerate in that sharp curve, right? And I think that analogy applies. I used it recently in a panel in Uruguay talking about national AI strategies, but I think it's very applicable to the setting that we're discussing today. So that's what I meant by that. And it's more that balance between regulation and innovation, right? That it's that conundrum that we're always part of. And so, I think as policymakers, we have to keep a couple of things in mind. The pace of technology was always, outpacing the regulatory framework. Now with COVID and more digital adoption and with AI, it's been exponential, and we just have to accept that. We have to use, I think, policies and regulation as tools for acceleration and perhaps not for restriction. That's kind of the idea. And the other thing I would say is, when I've talked to a lot of folks as I travel, on different regulatory frameworks, some countries are more regulated than others, some are decentralized, centralized. Brazil is more centralized from Brasilia. Here we're more decentralized. But creating an environment that is, low in complexity, low in uncertainty, I think that helps all the stakeholders, the citizens and the private sector. And what I mean by that is, there are many examples, but I remember the days where we're talking about net neutrality, starting even here in the United States, but I know in the Caribbean they've talked about that. In Brazil, we've talked about that for the past decade. And in here, I don't want to get into the details of net neutrality, but pretty much, is the internet considered a public utility? Or is it information services, right? Is it here Title I, Title II? And that becomes, it's changed from Title I to Title II. Now it's back to Title I, depending on the administration. And depending on whether it's Title I and Title II, it's either the FCC that regulates it or the FTC that regulates it. And so it complicates things, all over. And so having a good regulatory framework that simplifies things, especially, big boys can adjust quickly because they have the funding, but small businesses that have to change their products, right? I was at a World Bank, I'll just take a note, and I know I'm monopolizing your panel, but I was at a panel of round table in the World Bank talking about data privacy and AI a couple of months ago, and I'm not gonna say which agency from Europe, but this person was complaining about the contradictions that exist between GDPR and the EU AI Act, right? We just went live a couple of months ago. And, think about it. GDPR already created a lot of regulations for, small businesses in Europe and large businesses. Small businesses, sometimes it's cost prohibitive to change their products to adjust to that. But the EU AI Act is cross-border. And so it would impact small businesses anywhere in the world. And so, we have to consider the economic impact as well on the regulatory framework. So that's kind of what I mean by that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I think that that's something for us to also consider and continue to have conversations about. I think we have limited time here, but I think that there is much more to be discussed in that sense. And I think that, Safa, turning to you, as governments begin to adopt these new technologies, what investments should also be considered to protect the integrity of these systems and anticipate threats associated with a growing attack surface? And we touched on that at the beginning of this event and this conversation, but I think that there is, in addition to the digital literacy that we were talking about and the education, the capacity building that we were discussing, but also the need to adapt to a changing environment. How do you see some of these investments being important for the integrity of these systems?
Yeah, and just really appreciate that call out that, you know, the adoption of these technologies means an increasing and growing attack surface.
Yeah.
We have to come to terms with that first. And malicious actors will target that attack surface. They'll try to take advantage of that, whether they are non-state or state actors. There's a need for investment in training and education and capacity building so that we can use these systems effectively, but also protect them. But there's another policy component that I think that that's probably a little bit less tapped into than we probably should be. And there's a lot of opportunity for us to increase that through information sharing, public-private partnerships, but also with peer-to-peer and also with like other countries that are in the region. There's an opportunity for us to engage on these issues, share best practices, and really double down on those efforts to support international cooperation. I'd love to call out the OAS's confidence building measures specifically, just because that comes to mind immediately, where for the Atlantic Council, where we are training next generation cyber professionals through our university training programs, we're trying to get them familiar with those systems and those frameworks that exist so they can go into the workforce and try to leverage those. But really trying to see what small actions can have really outsized impacts when it comes to like the stability of cyberspace and making it a more reliable, predictable place.
For sure. You wanted to jump in?
No, I was just going to comment. I think, no doubt. I mean, folks are working from home. Every company now after COVID has, become a cloud company, and governments as well. And I think the surface of attack and the new vectors that exist are important. But the other side of cybersecurity is on the resilience side, redundancy side. We all remember what happened with CrowdStrike earlier this year, right? That impacted, I don't know, it's probably in the billions, the global economic impact. But, that single point of failure that all these companies, airports, Delta, I don't know how many flights were shut down for, I don't know how many days. I think that's as important as well to minimize single point of failures. And, I heard Diego talk a little bit before that the gap is in the demand side, and we have to execute and not plan. But I think designing these systems, especially smart cities, right? Because you don't want attacks there and you don't want single point of failures there, because I think the impact is much higher. I think spending some time on designing these systems to minimize single point of failures is as important. And I would add another thing on the capacity building. I'm trying to fill the blanks here, but I was in Sao Paulo talking to some friends, and Sao Paulo has become a very big digital city. Not very interoperable, but they have a lot going on there. And a couple of my friends are very, I don't want to say upset, but they're disappointed with the communication that exists between the government and the citizens. So the need for redress mechanisms, right, and grievances mechanisms, both at the same time, not one and the other. The ability to be able to communicate with the government, like a friend of mine was saying, I keep getting these speeding tickets, and not speeding tickets, that I made a left turn here, and I automatically get, because Sao Paulo has lots of cameras that are IoT edge devices that do analysis there and do automatic payment, and they send it directly, and a lot of them malfunction. But if they malfunction or not, you still get that bill. And it takes a long time for you to, and these are small things that we don't think from the perspective of the citizen, to write that dispute letter or go to court, whatever it is, a mechanism over there, if we don't have the proper redress mechanisms and the grievances, on the side of the government, that's part of the capacity building that I think is very important to consider when we deploy these solutions as well.
For sure. And honestly, São Paulo would also benefit from your example, Keith, of Quito, and traffic in São Paulo is crazy. So I think that this is something that we should take into consideration. And then to wrap up, I think that it goes directly to what you were mentioning, Andrew. As a final round of thoughts, and I wanted to pose this question to all three of you, what is one set of recommendations or what is one policy change that you see you would suggest for cities to adopt responsible, transparent, resilient, efficient digital tools for development? And Keith, I will start with you, but I think that it would be important for us to also think about, from your perspective, on the investment side, but also on what we were talking about, the metrics and the ability to scale.
Well, thank you. And again, thanks to this panel for the great discussion today, and appreciate it. From our perspective, yes, the project preparation is really key in order to have that roadmap for deploying and implementing smart city solutions and technologies. And it's really critical because there are existing systems. So how do you integrate with the existing systems? How do you protect it? How do you understand how it's going to impact the citizen? So that's why it's great to have this funding under this initiative to be able to do this type of project preparation, whether it's a feasibility study or a pilot project, so that cities have that roadmap. In terms of a recommendation, yes, please approach us. We're very excited to be working under this initiative. We would love to partner with you. I just came back from Brazil over the weekend, and so was seeing this in real time. And we did have a great discussion with the local governments there about smart city opportunities. So I think it's very well timed for this, whether it's in Brazil or Mexico, throughout the Caribbean, the Andean countries, and the rest of South America. I think it's great. And I just want to say again, thanks again for the panel, and I want to then appreciate and specifically thank Ambassador Nichols for all his leadership and support.
Andrew, I wanted to ask you the same question. So what is one recommendation for cities to adopt responsible digital tools for development? And then from your perspective, I think it would be interesting to showcase or try to think about it in terms of the connectivity between the federal and the local government and that communication and accessibility.
Yeah, no, so I'll say two things, and always from a macro level now. If there's one success story around Latin America, I think what Uruguay has been doing, for 15 years at least, with all their work in e-government and open data and open everything, digital ID, they're building the stack. The building blocks are the right ones. They're foundational building blocks. And one thing that I like that they do, and this is kind of a referenda, but it's not, is that they communicate policies and they give an opportunity to citizens and civil society and everyone to respond before they're implemented. And I know that a couple of states in the U.S. Do that. I know California was doing that well. I tried to get Maryland to do that, but it didn't work out that well. But I think coming back from the OAS and promoting democratic principles, what better direct democracy than that? I mean, that's completely inclusive, right? And you may not take all the comments from the public, but you at least consider them. And I think that's great. Probably something that we have to consider across America and in the United States as well. And to that point, I would also say that when you build smart cities, I see that as more the level of application level or presentation level. I'm a network engineer by trade, so I'm referring to the OSI network layer. But connectivity is layer one. And I'm not saying you have to have everyone connected 100%, but I think that you have to, at the national perspective, whether it's programs like FirstNet or Maryland First for first responders, you have to have good broadband connectivity. The second layer is really on the digital identity space. This is what India Stack has done very well. This is what Estonia has done very well with e-residency. The third layer is on real-time payment processes as well, whether it's UPI or whether it's Pix in Brazil. This is what we Brazilians do. In every American word that we use, we add an E. So Pixi, Internetchi, I live in Rockville. But, Pixi, CBDCs, if we want to talk about that. And then the fourth layer, it's a data exchange layer. And I think this doesn't have to be designed at the national level, as long as it's well architected, with APIs that are interoperable. I think those are 4 basic layers that have to start at the national level for any smart city, initiative to work well.
Thank you. Safa, final comments and one recommendation for cities.
Yeah, I think there's this opportunity, I think, for cities to adapt the level of understanding that is needed for the many versus the few. And creating, engaging in this design process that is responsive to that, acknowledging that everyone's going to interact with this technology in different ways. So how do we ensure that they have the understanding and the tools needed to engage with it in a way that's secure, safe, but also rewarding for them?
I think that we are wrapping with lots of recommendations and action-oriented points for us to take from this conversation and to move it forward for cities, the state level, and then the federal as well, and the global. So I wanted to thank you, Keith, so much for joining us. Andrew, Safa, thank you for being here. And with that, I'd like to also thank all of the speakers that we had here today joining us, and a special thank you to the U.S. State Department for the partnership, and congratulations again for this Data for Cities initiative. There's a lot for us to do, and I'd like to thank all of you joining us in person as well as those joining us virtually for coming to the Atlantic Council and listening to us here. And see you next time. Thank you. Have a good one. Thank you.
Quiero que aunque norte y sur sean distintos, lleven un mismo latido en el ritmo, como quien comparte el mismo apellido, porque al fin y al cabo somos latinos. Quiero que la unión que logra la fuerza rompa divisiones y abra más puertas. Quiero que entendamos que cuando todos sumamos se hace la diferencia.